And there, I think that we are all set up with OBS. All right. Happy Monday, guys. I'll give everyone a couple minutes to file in while we get the lecture booted up. I hope you all had a good weekend because we need to really hunker down after last week. And speaking of which, the way you guys behaved with the substitute, Mrs. Stace, was, frankly, unacceptable. And there will be demerits written up and sent to Principal Dow's office. I'm looking at you, Ethan. What did you do? You know what you did. I will discuss it further on Wednesday when I'm physically back into class. But for today, our priority will be catching up to where we... Sorry. I am not coughing my lungs up. I am fine. Thank you for asking, though. So, our priority today will be getting through the Great Gatsby discussions. The good news is that we should be able to move through the PowerPoint relatively quickly today, since it should all be old news for you guys after the reading. It's just pre-exam review since it is coming up. Yes, Olivia, I mean the book. That's very convincing, Olivia. So there is a quiz due in Canvas by midnight. Is Miss Ruby almost done with attendance? Ruby didn't come in? There's no teacher's aide in the classroom? Alright, let me send a quick text to Principal Dale, letting him know to send an aide over the next hour if there's anyone available. And I will base attendance on who I see responses from on today's discussions. Yes, I know I can base it off the participant list, but this way you guys will actually stick around and do the assignments. Without a teacher's aide in the classroom, I am not taking any chances. You and Mr. Carnardo made a substitute cry last week, so no, I do not trust you, Mr. Becker. And speaking of the assignments, last week you guys were not able to get through the 7 discussion assignments, so today we will need to get through all of them instead of just the last 3. And yes, these are for points. I know it's a lot, but you guys should have thought of that before you tormented Mrs. Stace. The good news is that the exam is on Thursday, which frees up Friday for the movie day if you guys are prepared for the Thursday exam. However, if we don't get through everything by then, we need to take the exam on Friday, which means no movie day before winter break. What movie? It's gonna be The Great Gatsby, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio. You guys say ew, but he used to be really popular. We say ew because he's gross. Here's a word of advice. Every celebrity that you like is gross. Every single one of them. Sometimes it's the people who you worship the most who end up disappointing you when you're older. When I liked him, he was under 25, and also I was younger than you guys. I think I was like 10. But we're getting off track. Let's get started. So, you guys are going to read a lot of books in this class and throughout high school, but I honestly think The Great Gatsby is one of my favorites, and not only that, but it tends to be the favorites among my students. The Great Gatsby is about a lot of things, and we'll review them all in time, but above all, it is about the American dream, and whether or not that is a dream that lives up to scrutiny. Now, what do you guys think the American dream is? Having a house and a white picket fence, all the basic stuff. Making enough money to take care of your family, being happy. Ethan, keep your classmates out of your responses. And Matt, first warning, watch the language. Okay, good responses, keep them coming. The American dream, to put it simply, is the idea that anyone in the United States has the opportunity to live a good life if they just put in the effort. Now, by vote in the chat, thumbs up or thumbs down, who believes the American dream to be true? And if you'd like, you can add why you think what you think. Down. Down, but it depends on the person. A little bit of both. Up. Getting a job is the only real step. I am seeing a lot of thumbs downs, and I'll be honest with you guys, the American dream is a very simple concept for a complicated world, which isn't always fair. And you know who else's thumb was probably down? The author of The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. So, we talked a bit about him before Thanksgiving, but as a review, Francis Scott Fitzgerald captured the cynicism of the 20s through his novels like The Great Gatsby. Something interesting about him, Fitzgerald fought in World War I, and before the war, he fell in love with a rich socialite who initially didn't marry him because he wasn't wealthy. And it wasn't until the publishing of This Side of Paradise that she actually did end up marrying him. Looking at the chat, it appears you guys are picking up what I'm putting down. There are many, many similarities between Fitzgerald's life and the characters in his book. Let's stay on track, guys. But yes, Fitzgerald truly wrote about his own anxieties with love, wealth, and the American dream. You know, anxieties that young people like yourselves are still feeling today. These are the literary tools that we've been utilizing through Unit 6. You should all know them like the back of your hand by now, but let's speed through this review. First up, unreliable narrators. It is what it sounds like, a storyteller who you can't quite take at face value. We came across an example earlier on this year when we read The Telltale Heart. Now, narrators can be unreliable for all kinds of reasons. They can be lied to, they can be naive, they can be misguided, they can be trying to make themselves look good. So, question in the chat, if the narrator is being lied to, wouldn't it be the other character who's the unreliable one and not the narrator? That is a good question, Tyler. In cases where the narrator trusts the word of an untrustworthy or sinister person in a story, that can still affect how they tell the story. Even if it isn't intentional, the information in the story is still unreliable. That makes sense? Alright, next. Color symbolism is when you use colors to symbolize a concept. For example, red might symbolize danger, while green symbolizes nature. Now, what are some examples of colors that you see every day that have meaning that you guys can think of? Go ahead and drop them in the chat. You guys know the drill. I'm not moving in until we get at least 3 responses. Okay? Traffic light, pink for girls, blue for boys, roses. Very good. Okay. In The Great Gatsby, the color that shows up the most is yellow. Sorry, guys. Let me mute my phone. Stupid fucking debt collectors. Okay. That is on silence. Apologies. So, The Great Gatsby does something interesting. Yellow usually means positive things like sunshine, happiness. Aaliyah mentioned yellow roses meaning friendship, and however, in The Great Gatsby, when you see yellow or gold, alarm bells should go off. Because in this story, yellow and gold represent dishonesty and the dishonest and corrupting power of wealth. Question in the chat, isn't the most important color in the book green because of the green light? And that's actually a very good point. Yellow shows up in more objects and characters and settings, but the green light is an important bit of symbolism in the book. So why do you guys think that the light is green? Money, jealousy, both of you are correct. It's supposed to remind you of the Statue of Liberty. You know, that's a good connection, Aaliyah. The Statue of Liberty was originally copper, but it actually might have been green around the time the 20s rolled around. I'm unsure. But yes, there is absolutely symbolism in the light being green. But I don't have a slide about the color green. I do, however, have a slide about the color yellow in this book. The more you guys complain about the minions, the more likely I am to bring them back. You kids will have to prime from my cold, dead, banana-loving fingers. Okay, so some examples. Jordan, the dishonest athlete who cheats at golf and is described as having golden skin. The car in the deadly accident is yellow. A less obvious one, the trees that Gatsby disappears behind when he goes to the pool and is shot and killed. Those trees are yellow. There are more examples that aren't on this list. For example, Gatsby is wearing a yellow tie when he meets Daisy in chapter 5. And what do you mean, spoiler? You read the book. You took a quiz on the book last week. You passed that quiz. Anyways, before we dive into the book, here is a look at the cover. We have these big ol' eyes over the city, and reflected in those eyes is a pair of golden nude figures posing. Now, no one knows for sure who the eyes absolutely belong to, in part because the painting, called Celestial Eyes, was commissioned before the book was finished. But there are two main theories. Guys, be mature. Seriously? Yes, you're allowed to see this, and it's on the test, so look closely, I guess, and pay attention. These aren't just nude figures on the cover of the book for no reason. They have a point. Now, like I said, there are two main theories. Theory 1, the eyes are the eyes of T.J. Eckleburg. Pause the chit-chat, guys. Stay focused and stay appropriate. Now, the eyes on the billboard were blue, of course, but if you look closely, you'll notice that these eyes are actually blue. They just have the golden figures reflected in them. Now, theory 2 is that the eyes represent Daisy, called in the book the Golden Girl. With this in mind, you might notice the nude figures look similar to Renaissance paintings of the Greek muses. Daisy is Jay's source of motivation, so in a way, Daisy can be seen as Gatsby's muse. Now, you guys are in for a treat. The good thing about this hybrid Zoom class format, aside from the fact that you guys get to cheat on quizzes, it seems, is that I am able to occasionally pull in some guest lecturers, and this is an exciting one. I was able to sit down with Professor Newport Greenlight, who is actually an expert on The Great Gatsby. He's written dozens of literary analyses on it and actually wrote the breakdown for the book that you guys actually have in your workbooks. I asked him a handful of questions, and the recordings of our conversation will be spread throughout this PowerPoint. Now, I want you all to pay attention. Be sure to rewatch these when you review the PowerPoint at home, because I will be including some questions related to his talking points on tomorrow's quiz. Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this lesson. Why don't you introduce yourself to the class?
Yes, I'm Professor Newport Greenlight. I'm the world's foremost expert on The Great Gatsby. I have read it more times than I've seen my own children, and I'm happy to speak about it whenever people ask, even when they don't ask. It's all I talk about.
Professor, as an expert on this text, if you were to see it incorporated into, say, a book based on the perspective of a popular Disney television cartoon character, how much of the choice to use The Great Gatsby in such a book would you chalk up to it, I don't know, recently entering the public domain?
Yes, well, I don't care for cartoons. I find them to be sinful. They lead your mind away from things that are more important, like, for example, literary analysis. But it's true. The Great Gatsby has entered into the public domain. For those of us listening who do not know about the public domain, after 100 years or so, a literary work is no longer owned by the copyright holders, and that means that any rapscallion or ragamuffin can take the text and pervert it and warp it in any way they desire, which I find to be offensive to the spirit of the book. But there's nothing I can do about it. I've petitioned the government. There's nothing that can be done.
So, again and again in the book, F. Scott Fitzgerald uses the colors yellow and gold to denote wealth, the evils that follow the pursuit of wealth. Daisy, the target of Gatsby's obsession, who eventually becomes his ruin when she kills someone in his yellow car, is described as a golden girl. In the book of Gatsby, yellow is radioactive, affecting everything around it in this negative way. What can you tell the class about this colorful deception? Is there anything else that yellow symbolizes?
Well, at first, I just must point out, as a pedant, you said the Book of Gatsby. It's called The Great Gatsby, just so you know. In terms of the color yellow, yellow, obviously, we think of gold. We think of the sun, source of all life. When a child is born, they start from the darkness of the mother's womb, and then, bright light, often a yellow light. It symbolizes the things we try to move towards, but also things that can hurt us. Fire can flicker yellow; it can burn your hand. I'm told that the pocket monster, Pikachu, I've heard about, popular yellow. People move towards cartoon characters. The Simpsons, yellow. SpongeBob, yellow. I heard that the website Amazon.com used to be the button was gray to hit purchase. Then some genius said, make it yellow. People click on it more. So it's something you move towards, but something with danger inside, like a bee that can sting you.
Oh. Whew. Okay, guys, so it is time for the discussion. So, before we move on to the assignment, there is one thing I want to point out. You guys should all have your books with you. I'll give you a second to pull them out. But when you do, I want you all to open your books to the epigraph. That is the little quote before the story starts, before the foreword in the book. Yes, so it's the one right over here, highlighted in yellow. Read along with me. Then wear the gold hat if that will move her. If you can bounce high, bounce for her too. Till she cry lover, gold-hatted, high-bouncing lover, I must have you. So, here we have a poem about wearing a fancy hat and doing a performance, all to get the attention of someone that you love. So I want you guys to tell me, what kind of tone is F. Scott Fitzgerald setting with this poem? What do you guys think that the poem is about? Gold is dishonesty, so the lover is being dishonest, like Gatsby will be. He wants us to think Gatsby is stupid. Man, I can't tell if you're being genuine, but you're actually kind of correct. Think about it. He's bouncing around, acting like a clown, acting like a performer. The title, The Great Gatsby, is suggestive of a magician like the Great Houdini, subtly emphasizing that this is all a performance. No one is exactly what they seem. Truly, in this story of the rich and the powerful, we can trust no one. Now, Gatsby is a performer, and he's using his gold to razzle-dazzle us, but the question is, how much will that work? Will the reader be dazzled? Will Nick? Will Daisy? Bear that in mind tomorrow for your in-class essays, alright? Okay, let me share again. It is time for our first discussion assignment. For this assignment, you guys get to share something about the media that you guys enjoy. Tell me some kind of examples of color symbolism in your favorite movies or TV shows or video games. I am going to put 3 minutes on the alarm. And after that, I will be right back because I actually need to feed my cat. You guys see the timer, 3 minutes. Yep, that is set. You know, Olivia, if I can find him. He's been really shy the last couple days, but I'm sure he'll come out if I open a can of his food. Let me stop sharing. Let me turn on the Mochi cam. Alright, I'll be right back with Mochi. You guys did well. Let's get a reward in the form of a cat. But you guys need to focus on the discussion. Remember, 3 minutes on the clock. It doesn't need to be perfect, just a couple of sentences, okay? Be right back. Mochi! Mochi, where are you? Mochi? Yeah, Olivia, I think he's under the couch. You know, a few days ago, something banged on our window like a tree branch or something, and he's been really jittery ever since. Okay, but let's get back to it. Okay, the 3 minutes are up. Okay. Alright, let me refresh. It looks like we got some good answers here. Like I said, one of these discussions will be used to take attendance, so you all better stick around. Why are you booing? If you intend to stay for the rest of the class, you have no reason to boo. And you wouldn't skip class, would you? Okay. Alright, everyone. So, this is our main cast of Chapter 1. Before we get to the main event, let's get to know our cast and crew, starting with Nick Carraway. Nick is our reliable, honest, and good-natured narrator, and he'll tell you that himself. He comes from a well-off family in the Midwest, he went to Yale University, and he's just returned from the war and moved next to the mysterious Jay Gatsby. But who is Nick really? As I mentioned, Nick himself will tell you that he's honest, the type of person who people love to tell all their secrets to, but you'll realize that often when someone tells you who they are, it's better to let them show you. But Nick isn't dishonest. When does he lie? Well, he definitely lies to Tom later on in the story when he's helping facilitate Gatsby and Daisy's affair, but ultimately, I am not saying that Nick is a liar, but he is flawed. That makes him a much more relatable character, but it also affects the way that he tells the story. Partially because of the deceptive and messy people he surrounds himself with, Nick is probably not the most reliable source of information, despite his best efforts. Basically, this is Nick. You all know someone like Nick. Heck, some of you guys are probably a little bit like Nick. Next, we have Daisy. Daisy married the very rich and very unfaithful Tom Buchanan, and she's also the long-lost love of Jay Gatsby. Daisy is a very fickle character, and just as life with Daisy is Gatsby's long-held dream, Daisy represents the fickle nature of the American dream. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Remember how we went over how Zelda Fitzgerald rejected F. Scott Fitzgerald's advances? Would you believe me if this happened to F. Scott Fitzgerald not once, but twice? That's right, 2 different rich women ended up passing this man up. Poor Francis. Geneva King, similar to Zelda, passed F. Scott Fitzgerald up because he wasn't wealthy enough, and instead married the wealthy polo player Bill Mitchell. And speaking of polo players, Tom Buchanan is a wealthy, arrogant polo player who can't stop cheating on his wife. He's also especially racist and sexist compared to the rest of our cast, and considering this story literally takes place in the 1920s, that is saying something. A glitch? I'm not seeing it on my end. Can you guys still read everything okay? Alright then, continuing on. So, Tom walks around with an air of superiority, lording around the people who surround him. Nick even implies that people in Yale didn't even like the guy. Tom is a dumb jock. No one likes him. He's a rich man who peaked in high school. He is American literature's most universally unlikable frat bro. And that's all good and fine, but I feel the need to remind you, Geneva King left F. Scott Fitzgerald for a polo player, which might inform why Tom is written to be such a jerk in this book. Next, we have Jordan Baker. She is an athlete and independent woman, so independent in fact that Tom thinks someone ought to rein her in. She's a professional golfer, though we find out that she is known to cheat at a few games and is characterized as dishonest through So, Jordan represents the modern, at the time of the book's writing, flapper culture. Sorry guys, I think my cat might have decided to walk all over my keyboard. Yeah, this is on the test, take notes. Okay, so, there are 2 main locations introduced in Chapter 1. West Egg, the flashy new money part of Long Island, and East Egg, where the old money families live. And it's in Chapter 1 that we find ourselves in East Egg, where Nick goes to Tom and Daisy's house to have dinner with them and their friend Jordan. While there, we learn several key things about our characters. 1. Tom is cheating on his wife, and everyone knows it. 2. Daisy is woefully unhappy as both a wife and a mother, probably on account of all the cheating. And 3. Nobody seems to know much about Jay Gatsby, but at night, Nick sees Gatsby looking longingly at a green light across the bay. Now, Daisy is an interesting character in that she acts very shallow and superficial, but she does so well in a very no-win situation, being a woman in the 1920s. We learn that when she had her daughter, she was alone, and when she found out she was having a daughter, she said, quote, "I hope she'll be a fool." Well, my question to you guys is, why does Daisy say this? Because she's a bad mom. You're not wrong. Ignorance is bliss. She thinks intelligence isn't important if you're a woman in the 20s. She thinks men like dumb girls. You know, man, I don't think that's the answer that you'd select on SATs, but I also don't think you're technically wrong. So none of these answers are necessarily wrong answers. Isn't she rich? I don't get what this lady has to complain about. You know, I hear what you're saying, Avisha. But there is an intersection between class and gender that's worth exploring. It's important to remember that one does not cancel out the other. Daisy is very wealthy and has an easier life because of it, and Daisy experiences misogyny are both true statements. And when she was in that bed alone, having just given birth, and her husband was probably cheating on her across town, her money probably didn't provide a lot of comfort to her. She could still afford the hospital bed. That is true, Aaliyah. This line ultimately says a lot about Daisy, but also about how Daisy views misogyny and womanhood. And, hint hint, I encourage you all to think about it for the discussion assignment. Okay, here is what Professor Greenlight had to say about Daisy and about misogyny in the 1920s. Sorry guys, I think there's an ad. So, Daisy is someone who strikes me in the text as someone who is neglected by her husband, who feels unfulfilled by her life as a mother. She feels, if you will, limited by the two-dimensionality of the universe of 1920s womanhood. Would you say that it's this tragic limitation, this forced flattening of her character into this monotonous space that causes her to be so attention-starved, so desperate for someone to follow her around like an obedient pet in the way that Gatsby eventually does? Or do you think it's more due to her inherently selfish nature?
Well, Daisy has a bit of a contradiction. She is desired by all, but seen by none. She feels a lack of connection, which she then tries to make up for with superficiality. She wants to be adored, but when you're put on a pedestal, you're never truly appreciated. So she's torn between that safety and desiring the chaos that would make her feel truly alive. Chaos represented by Gatsby, which she goes towards, and then decides no, too much. It is it's something I think we can all relate to. I, as a stuffy professor, sometimes I would like to do something ridiculous, like perhaps to go windsurfing or eat a hot dog, but no.
All right. I'm just reading through the chat. I want you all to know that I'm glad you're all engaging with the story, thinking critically. It's not only okay to question each other and yourselves about how you feel about nuanced characters, but it is encouraged. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 2. Here are some more key players. Matt, language, second warning. I don't know if cuck is a swear word, but we could ask Principal Dale what he thinks. Okay. George is the downtrodden husband of an unfaithful woman. He is one of our more sympathetic characters. Myrtle Wilson is George's wife, but also Tom's mistress. She's come to resent her husband for his poverty, and with Tom, she experiences the taste of a better life. Come on, guys, focus. In her apartment with Tom, she has a painting of the French Palace of Versailles. Why do you guys think that is? She wants a better life. Literary symbolism. All right, all true. Next slide. Valley of Ashes is a land between East Egg and West Egg. It has been ruined by industrialization. It's dusty, it's gray, and the factories, which are presumably owned by the wealthy people in East and West Egg, are always spewing smoke. So this is a poor region that has literally been destroyed by the rich. The billboard of T.J. Eckleburg, as we mentioned, is symbolic of the watchful eyes of God. The billboard looks out over the Valley of Ashes, which is where the car accident at the climax of the story takes place. The glitch is back? Guys, I really don't see anything. I'll look into it before tomorrow's class, okay? So, what happens in chapter 2? Tom and Nick go to George's garage to pick up Myrtle. And with some others, they throw a party in the apartment that Tom is renting to have his affair. And during that party, Tom breaks Myrtle's nose for talking too much about Daisy. And after that, Nick leaves with one of the party guests, Mr. McKee. And that's basically where the chapter ends. To answer the question that you're all thinking, it is unclear whether Nick just randomly sleeps with this guy at the party, But also, yes, in most scholastic interpretations of this book, he sleeps with this guy at the party. I have found over the years that instead of glossing over the homoerotic elements of this book, we should just talk about it. So, later on in this presentation, we will do just that. Olivia, I don't think a reference to yaoi is appropriate. Yes, I know what yaoi is. I've been a high school teacher for 7 years. I know things. And I know enough to say that we should move on to the discussion. All right. Okay, guys, pull out your books. Before the discussion, we're going to have a conversation about something that will not only help you understand Tom more, but will probably make you hate him a little bit more as well. Some people might be surprised that Tom would be attracted to the poor Myrtle Wilson with a face that, quote, holds no gleam or facet of beauty. So, Daisy is the archetypal flapper girl. Slender, boyish frame, all straight lines and angles, her short hair, her rebellious pursuit of freedom, it's all indicative of the era. Meanwhile, Tom is incredibly traditional. Think about what he says as Jordan is leaving the house. This is on page 18. "She's a nice girl," said Tom after a moment. "They oughtn't to let her run around the country this way." "Who oughtn't to?" inquired Daisy coldly. "Her family." So, here we see that Tom is a traditional man who values traditional women and traditional values. Before the era of the flapper, beauty standards for women were markedly more feminine. When Tom would have been growing up, the ideal was the Gibson girl, which had a very different silhouette than the flapper archetype. Guys, come on. Now, listen to Myrtle's full description. Quote, "She carries her surplus flesh sensuously." So, Myrtle matches Tom's ideal more than Daisy does, but it doesn't matter. He doesn't emotionally care about Myrtle. He punches her in the nose by the end of chapter 2. When Daisy is talking about her daughter being a fool, she is communicating that in her eyes, it did not matter the circumstances. There was no way to exist in this world as a woman and be intelligent enough for aspirations without being punished for it. Her world isn't ready for a three-dimensional visionary. And while this obviously doesn't justify everything that Daisy does in the story, is it any wonder that Daisy says that she thinks the best thing a woman can be is a fool? Tom treats these women like trophies, which gives us something to compare to when we get to Jay and Daisy in the next couple of chapters. How does Jay treat his love interest compared to Tom? How is it similar? How is it different? He's spent years chasing after this, obsessing over this, but when he has it, what does that dynamic actually look like? When Stanford Pines looks out over that bay to that green light, is it a person he's thinking about, or is it what he stands to gain? I'm sorry, I mean, when Jay Gatsby looks... Oh my god, I'm so sorry, guys. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This has been happening a bit lately. Allergies or something. I'm sorry, 1 second. Oh my god, okay, I'm gonna clean up this nosebleed. Let me share the screen. Here. Okay, discussion 2. 3 minutes on the clock. Oh my gosh. I'm gonna be right back. So sorry. Okay. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm really, really sorry. Alright. Time is up. Let me refresh. Looks like we have some good answers here. Sorry. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. Alright, it's finally time to get to the star of our show, Mr. Jay Gatsby, aka James Gatz. By the start of chapter 3, all we know about him is that he's fabulously wealthy and he throws fancy parties. Jay's entire opulent lifestyle, we eventually learn, is to impress Daisy Buchanan, a woman he fell in love with years ago. So, what is it exactly that happens in chapter 3? Nick is invited to one of these fancy parties where he hears all kinds of rumors about Gatsby. Like, these people think he's a German spy or something. At the party, Nick doesn't really relate to the people around him. He feels like an outsider. Nick sees Jordan, he recognizes her from that time at Daisy's house, and they explore the house together. And there he meets Gatsby, who is close to his age, relatively young. Gatsby seems just as disconnected to the people at his own party as Nick does, though Nick feels a sense of understanding from him. Gatsby goes on to have a private meeting with Jordan, and from there, Nick and Jordan eventually leave the party, witnessing a car accident. Language Olivia, first warning. Interesting thing we pick up about Jay Gatsby here is that the man is only around 30 years old. Not a young adult by any measure, but definitely not old enough to be the type of guy to repeat old sport all the time. We get this foreshadowing, even this early, that he's trying to emulate his idea of a rich, snobby person. It's his way of shedding his poor upbringing and emulating the upper crust of the scientific community that he so wants to be a part of. He's not from the slums of Glasshard Beach, he's an Oxford man, a man of wealth, a man of taste, and he fought in the same war as Nick. You know, World War I was a particularly brutal war, unlike any before it. They had trench warfare, chemical weaponry, etc. The fact that Nick and Jay both fought in this war might be another one of the reasons why they're both disconnected to the party, and why they relate to one another. There is a man who Nick calls Owl Eyes who lives in the library, and he points out that Gatsby has hundreds of very real expensive books, but they're uncut. In the 1910s, you needed to actually slice through the pages of some books with a letter opener as you read through it. And all of Gatsby's books are uncut, so he's buying these very expensive books for appearances, but... Sorry, guys. I thought I muted it. So, something notable about this era is... Sorry. There, that should be muted. It says it's muted. No, I do not need to get that. So, in Gatsby's... Oh my god. One moment. Understand? Do not fucking call me again. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't find a book in the woods. Now stop calling this fucking number. I'm really sorry, guys. I thought I was muted. Moving on. So, something very obvious about this book is that there is a lot of drinking in it, like basically every chapter. And that's notable because in the 1920s, or at least for most of it, drinking alcohol was illegal. Oh, they changed their minds like a few years later. Basically, no one followed the law anyways. People didn't stop drinking. They just kind of started drinking privately. And smuggling in that alcohol became one of the main ways that gangs and the mob raised a bunch of money. They just decided to undo that. Concerns about the morality of drinking and the mob and the huge boom in crime for this era were a big part of modernist anxieties at the time. These anxieties are what fuel a lot of F. Scott Fitzgerald's work. Basically, this was the 1920s. Actually, I don't remember that phrasing. Meyer Wolfsheim. Meyer Wolfsheim is Gatsby's shady business associate. The character was inspired by Arthur Rothstein, a famous gangster and bootlegger in the 1920s, who actually paid a team to lose the World Series in 1919. There is also some anti-Semitism that's worth mentioning here. Fitzgerald does a lot of emphasizing that Wolfsheim is Jewish, and he is based on a real Jewish man, but there are times when Fitzgerald's descriptions lean into pure caricature, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. Meyer is, of course, an example of a classic Prohibition gangster. They rose to power by controlling illegal alcohol during Prohibition, fueling violence and corruption, and of course, these gangsters were behind Gatsby's own personal wealth. So in chapter 4, Gatsby picks Nick up for lunch where he recounts a rehearsed, frankly unbelievable story of his rich family, his education. He tells Nick he lived like a king overseas. Basically, it's the fakest story that Nick has ever heard. Gatsby then introduces Nick to his shady business partner, Myra Wolfshing, who wears human molar cufflinks. Yeah, like actual teeth. From Jordan, Nick learns Gatsby's real backstory. Gatsby and Daisy were deeply in love in Louisville in 1917, but Gatsby went to war, and Daisy married Tom instead. So, years later, Gatsby bought his mansion to be across the bay from Daisy, and he throws these big parties in hopes that she'll attend. And now, he's asking Nick to invite Daisy to his house for tea so that he can see her again. So quick note, something I glossed over in chapter 4 is that it begins with like 3 or 4 pages of Nick just naming names of rich and powerful people that he saw at Gatsby's house. Now, these names aren't important. You do not need to remember all of these names. However, the names stand in contrast to the end of the book. All of these people showed up for the parties, but not a single one of them show up to Gatsby's funeral. In this chapter, we also get a description of Gatsby's car, this flashy, bright abomination of a vehicle. As Nick notes, he had seen it. Everyone had seen it. Think of the words describing it here. Bright, swollen. This car is recognizable, which foreshadows the end of the book when it's recognized from the accident. Guys, come on. So, as I mentioned, Gatsby gives Nick just the fakest flippin' backstory in the world. He collected gems and paintings in Europe, and he even has props. He carries around a Medal of Honor to show people. And Nick believes in about half of his backstory, which is like half too much because almost none of this is true. In turn, it makes the reader wonder what is true and what isn't. Something I want you guys to consider. Gatsby spends years changing his identity, gaining millions, buying a house across the bay, and throwing parties every night in the hopes that maybe, one day, he can win Daisy back. It's like he's watching her every move. I want you guys to consider, how would you feel if you learned that someone was watching you that closely? Would you be flattered? Would you be weirded out? Would you be concerned for your safety? Depends on how close you knew each other before you were separated. That is fair, but remember, I think Gatsby only knew Daisy for about a month before the war. Yup. Huh. I'm sorry, guys. I gotta keep Mochi off of my desk. God, this cat messed up all kinds of slides. I hope he didn't delete anything. For this next clip, Professor Greenlight gave his insight on Nick as an unreliable narrator. Sorry. Ad. So, throughout the great book of Gatsby, the narrator, Nick, assures the reader that he's trustworthy, non-judgmental, and one of the only honest people in the story. He then proceeds to associate himself with evil and powerful men and judge everyone he meets. He also, at several times in the story, presents the life story of Jay Gatsby to the reader, almost like a tale that was ripped from Jay's journal or something. When the reader gets to those pages about Jay's life, should they take them at face value and assume that Nick is telling the truth? Or are these events at all altered in Nick's retelling?
Well, it's a... sorry. Pipe smoke was messing up my voice. Yes. Should we trust narrators? Are they reliable? Very good question. I mean, look, The Great Gatsby is a story about it's this very, very American story about somebody creating themselves, creating a folklore version of themselves that they go around and they tell other people. And so it like is very thematically consistent. A hagiography of somebody seen from an outsider, then sort of morphing into, is this Nick's perspective? Is this Gatsby's perspective? Is Nick sort of laundering Gatsby's reputation? Has he lost track of the Gatsby he knows and the Gatsby other people are talking about? So, I think a story about a self-created character makes sense to blur the lines between, what is truth and what isn't. There's lots that was intentionally left ambiguous. The thing about a story written by a liar is that, in the air at every given moment is, what game are you playing?
Okay, guys, it is time for the discussion. Okay, so, Nick. Nick is someone who talks at end about his honesty, and considering at the end of chapter 4 he starts officially dating Jordan, I think it's worth mentioning that he tells the reader that he is not someone who is willing to cheat. What he says specifically is, and this is on page 58, he says, "But I am slow thinking and full of interior rules that act as brakes on my desires. And I knew that first I had to get myself definitely out of that tangle back home." So, this ignores a couple of things. For one thing, he says outright that he has been dating around, and in fact mentions in chapter 3 that he's having an affair with a girl in New Jersey. But he also mentions offhand that he has a girl in the Midwest who he's been sending love letters to, and that's not even touching whatever happened with Mr. McKee. Are they love letters or just letters? Well, he says specifically that he is signing the letters Love Nick. I can't tell you what's in his heart, but that sounds like a love letter to me. It seems like Nick is more flexible on this moral line than he might care to admit. That doesn't mention, of course, that he is going to literally help Daisy cheat on her husband with Gatsby. But Tom's already cheating on Daisy, so who cares, Madison says. I mean, if that's how you feel, that's how you feel. What I will say is that Nick describes not cheating as one of his internal rules. So whether I think it's wrong or you think it's wrong that Daisy is cheating on Tom when Tom's already cheating on Daisy is besides the point. Nick thinks that it's wrong, and he still finds himself agreeing to help make it happen. Speaking of Tom, do you remember how just blatantly racist he was? Is one of the things that Nick and the reader find distasteful about Tom. However, think about how Nick describes Meyer Wolfsheim. It's blatantly anti-Semitic. Nick thinks that Tom is stupid and belligerent and racist, but he still spends the day with Tom having a party in that apartment, along with people like Mrs. McKee, who use anti-Semitic slurs. And he didn't say anything to imply that he was against any of it. Now, part of this is definitely just F. Scott Fitzgerald's own anti-Semitic attitude bleeding into the text, but even so, we're left wondering as readers, how similar is Nick to the company that he keeps? It's similar to the cheating thing, like he claims to be against cheating and dishonesty, but basically every adult around Nick is a cheater. Heck, even Jordan cheats at golf. And then there's the question of the rich. Nick has things to say about wealthy people. In this story, he calls them shallow and careless, but he's part of Daisy's wealthy family. He attended Yale University. He doesn't say these things about himself, though, and he definitely doesn't say them about fellow rich man Gatsby. Okay, discussion time. Let me share my screen. All right. Okay. 3 minutes on the clock. Just give me a couple of sentences. timer went off and your 3 minutes are up. Okay, so chapter 5. Gatsby asks Nick to invite Daisy for tea, offering Nick a shady business deal, which Nick refuses. On the day of the meeting, Gatsby is super anxious. He's sending people to cut Nick's lawn down, and he fills Nick's house with flowers. This man is desperate. Daisy arrives, and the initial meeting is actually really stiff and embarrassing. But after Nick leaves them alone for a bit, Gatsby shows Daisy his opulent mansion and his vast collection of shirts, leading Daisy to cry, overwhelmed by his wealth. This girl is literally holding onto these shirts and ugly crying into them. The two forget that Nick is there altogether, and he slips out quietly. Now that Gatsby has the woman of his dreams, Nick observes that the Greenlight doesn't seem so symbolic to him anymore. Gatsby's accomplished what he's worked for 5 years. Nick and the reader are left to wonder whether Daisy can possibly live up to Gatsby's vision of her. In chapter 6, we get a pretty full breakdown of that life story. We learn that Gatsby was born James Gatz from North Dakota, and at 17 he met millionaire Dan Cody. He cut off half of his name, going from Stanford to just Ford. He abandoned his family, and from this moment on, he rebuilt himself. In present day, Nick goes over to Gatsby's house to find that Tom is there. Tom does not approve of Daisy knowing Jay, though at this point, of course, he doesn't know about the affair. Towards the end of the chapter, Tom and Daisy attend one of Gatsby's glamorous parties, and Gatsby basically dismisses Tom, but Gatsby is also eager to show off his wealth to Daisy. But Daisy does not enjoy this. She doesn't like the party, which devastates Gatsby, and he reveals that it isn't enough that Daisy loves Gatsby. He wishes for Daisy to admit that she never loved Tom, as if they could turn back the clock to 1917. So, question for you guys. When Gatsby tells Nick that he wants to change the past, how did that affect your impression of him and his love for Daisy? It's honestly sad that he can't get over it. It makes you mad. You question why it matters. At this point, he has won the girl. Why is it so important she denounces Tom? Very good. It shows that the version of Daisy he loves doesn't exist anymore. He can't love her with all her history. Very good. Very good. Again, I can't tell any of you how you're supposed to feel, but all of your responses are making sense. Now, think about how you would feel in Gatsby's shoes, but also think about how you would feel in Daisy's. Later on in the book, she's asked directly to denounce her love of Tom. Would that be easy for you? Would it be hard? Is this a situation where everyone can be happy? Additionally, there's something else for you to think about. Why is it that Gatsby changes his name? Think about it. He changed his entire identity. He abandoned his family in New Jersey. He moved to Oregon. He walks around with props with his new name and everything, all to reform himself from scratch. Why would he do that instead of just changing his habits or his personality? I mean, it wasn't to trick Daisy. She knew who he was instantly as soon as she saw him. Not to mention, he changed his name before he met her. This was all going down with Dan Cody in 1912. Yes, good answers. Ultimately, I think it's interesting to note that while Gatsby wants to completely distance himself of his past, he wants Daisy to recreate the past, to be a relic of the past. Yes, Avisha, he's holding her to a very different... Okay. Let's move on to the discussion. Okay. So, I want you guys to go to the end of chapter 6. It'd be page 110. But it's the last page of chapter 6. So, he says, you can't repeat the past. Nick says, you can't repeat the past. And Gatsby says, why, of course you can. He talked a lot about the past, and I gathered that he wanted to recover something, some idea of himself, perhaps, that had gone into loving Daisy. His life had been confused and disordered since then, but if he could just return to a certain starting place and go over it all slowly, he could find out what that thing was. We see in this chapter that Gatsby perpetually thinks of Daisy as the sweet girl who loved him in Louisville. And he has convinced himself that the Daisy that he loves has always loved him back and has no faults. But that's ignoring that Daisy did not choose him when he was poor. Ultimately, she chose Tom. Gatsby's version of Daisy is idealized to a standard that the real Daisy can never meet, and it makes one wonder, how does this hurt Gatsby? And of course, how does this hurt Daisy? Daisy is being compared to someone who she could never be, and Gatsby is chasing after someone who no longer exists. And it's a little pathetic. Everything he does for his golden muse. It's like he's nothing without them. And he's changed the trajectory of his life. He's paid for golden statues, and he's isolated himself of any meaningful connection. He lets his entire self-worth be wrapped up in someone that he worships, who cares about him on a whim. And it doesn't matter whatsoever if Gatsby went to West Coast Tech, or if he went to Oxford, or how many PhDs he has. He really just needs the validation of his muse. He'd give anything for the way that he looks at him during karaoke, for the sun in his Oh my god! I'm gonna be right back. Please stop this. I can give you whatever you want. Just please stop this. Just stop this. I can't take it anymore. Just please, please, please. What are your thoughts on Jay's obsession with the grand unified theory of infiltrating high society? Do you think that a big part of Jay's obsession comes from the fact that secretly he grew up as James Gatz, a poor kid in the lead paint district of a Midwest town who was shunned by those around him for his freakishly poor hands?
Yeah, the theory checks out. I to relate to this character, uh I grew up in Piedmont, California, which is a incredibly rich town. And me and my family, like we only lived on the border of the town. We could not afford to live in Piedmont, but our great aunt Lois, Grantee Lois, helped us out, and so we were able to afford the smallest house in the rich city with the great school district. But that meant that the wealth in Piedmont was topographical. So from my bedroom when I was in middle school and high school, which was a closet, literally like Harry Potter. It was a laundry room. There was a bunch of laundry that blocked my door. I had to open the door to go in past the laundry. And there was an ironing board I literally used as a desk. That's not a joke. It was very, very, very tiny. But we just squeaked in under the borderline so we could be part of the school district. But it meant that, every day mom would drive us to school and we'd go up the hill, and the houses would get bigger and bigger and bigger until they had columns, and until they had castle spires. And then we would get to high school, where I would go hang out with my fellow chums, all of whom had like multiple cars and multiple TVs and computers and pantries, some that had giant cheese wheels in them. I was like, pantries? There's a room for cheese? It's bigger than my entire bedroom? Wait, you don't have to use an ironing board for a desk? All that is to say that when I read The Great Gatsby in high school, and there was a story about a guy from the bottom of the hill conning his way up to the top of the hill, looking out his window every night and thinking of a greater life. I would literally look out my window at the big houses up the hill. And I immediately related to the character. I was like, oh, this guy's going to use the power of his magical bullshit to climb to the top of the hill somehow. He's going to, tell his tale. So yeah, I mean, I was not dissimilar to Mr. Gatsby in high school. I said, what's my grand unified theory? How do I get up to the top of the hill? What am I good at? Jokes and pictures. Can I distill the ingredients of jokes and pictures in a bathtub into moonshine, sell it, and get to the top? So yes, I can relate to standard Gatsby a little bit.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys. That was weird, right? Let's move on, please. I'm fine. Let's go on. We're about to do a discussion now, and then after that, we're actually at the part about Mr. McKee. So let's get through this. No, I'm okay. Let's see. All right. 3 minutes on the clock. And I'm going to get myself some more coffee and collect myself, and then we'll all be so refreshed, okay? So, just a sentence or two. I'll see you in 3 minutes, okay? Okay. All right. Time is up. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So, here are some of the things that Nick says about Gatsby. He calls his personality gorgeous. He mentions that when Gatsby smiles at him, he feels deeply and intimately understood. Are we even allowed to talk about gay? In the state of California, we are. Also, we're not talking about gay stuff. We're talking about legitimate interpretations of one of the most important novels in American history. So, something absolutely wild is the difference between the way Nick describes men versus the way he talks about women. Whereas Tom has enormous power in his body and a great pack of muscles straining his clothing, Jordan has a small breast and an erect carriage. Whereas Gatsby's smile has a quality of eternal reassurance in it. Myrtle's face contains no gleam of beauty. I couldn't tell you if this is just the way that F. Scott Fitzgerald describes men, or the way he writes Nick as describing men, but it's absolutely a trend. Are you saying you can't describe another guy without being gay? I am not saying that, Tyler. I'm simply pointing out that a lot of people read this and see something interesting there, and it's up to you to decide how you want to interpret that. And of course, we need to talk about Mr. McKee. We discussed, of course, how Nick leaves the party with this stranger, but also worth mentioning, during the party, he wipes off a spot of shaving cream from Mr. McKee's face with no prompting. He calls him effeminate while calling his wife shrill and horrible. Were men just more affectionate back then? I mean, maybe. It's fair to think of that. But if someone were to push back, they might note that people were also more proper back then. And wiping off another man's face after you just met him is anything but proper. No, Matt. Men aren't allowed to be friends anymore. It's illegal. Sorry. There's also this innuendo in the elevator with the elevator operator telling Mr. McKee that he's not allowed to touch the lever. And you can interpret that however. Ethan, be appropriate. One moment. One might think that there wouldn't be queer representation in this book, but there actually was a very thriving queer scene in New York at the time. Consider, Mr. McKee is a New York artist who was very likely in this very scene, a scene that Nick would have been exposed to. Let's hear once more from Professor Greenlight.
Don't skip it, 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 don't skip it.
Queer readings of the Book of Billsby are so common nowadays that they're basically accepted into most scholastic interpretations of the novel. You can look at the way that Nick describes the men that he comes across with details on their frames and their clothes and their bodies, with a level of descriptive liberties that he does not give the women, including the woman that he dates. You can look at Nick's affection.
Oh my God, yeah, she is such a footnote in the way that he talks about her.
Truly, he hates her. It's so funny.
Like, oh, I guess I have to date a woman. Oh, she just landed in my life.
And of course, you can look at how at the end of chapter 2, Nick takes the effeminate photographer, Mr. McKee, home with him, and the scene cuts to Mr. McKee in bed with Nick in their underwear. And then it just cuts abruptly to the train station the next day. And that's all good and interesting. But I suppose I'm even more interested in the scene where Nick and the object of his loyalties, Jay Gatsby, spend a night in the mindscape getting drunk and singing karaoke in a situation where, quote, one thing led to another. Do you think that F. Scott Fitzgerald intended the karaoke scene, as well as the rest of the book, to have such heavy-handed queer undertones?
Well, let me ask, to rope one more book into this. Have you read Moby Dick recently?
Not recently, but I have.
Moby Dick is actually a lot like The Great Gatsby in a lot of ways, in that it is a sort of, Ishmael, like Nick Carraway, is this sort of poetic, sort of drifter looking for kind of a more charismatic life to latch on to, and finds somebody like monomaniacally obsessed with something, whether it's Ahab with the whale, and Ishmael is just sort of, he's both attracted to and sort of horrified by all of this, but he can't bring himself to look away, and is constantly finding himself in bed with Queequeg. Like, I think to the Gatsby of it, and then to the standard of it, I think these stories about like sort of big American myths, like there's this concept of this almost kind of gross, regressive Ayn Randian concept of this one great man who changes the world, right? Who's got some obsession that is gonna transform everything, and we're sort of, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I was like that guy? The only thing that's really interesting in stories to me is relationships. And kind of like when you sort of put your hands on a Ouija board with a friend and the thing starts moving, it's you moving it, but it's kind of like it's moving on its own. Imagine that a god of inspiration came to you and offered you the thing you always wanted, which is to feel like incredible and special and important. But then also he would disappear, and then when he's gone, your self-esteem is gone. What kind of a dynamic would that create? And then similarly, if you're a sort of malevolent god of chaos who's just going through history looking for various puppets to do your whim, and finally one of them is actually pulling it off, what would that feel like? But in terms of intent, it's very much just like what feels true to the characters, and that's sort of as deeply as I think about it when I sit down to just write. Anyone can use the language they want, but it's not healthy, whatever it is.
Okay, so as mentioned, some have proposed that Nick's characterization is an example of queerness. There are homoerotic elements in Fitzgerald's work. But Fitzgerald was also close friends with Ernest Hemingway, who was notoriously homophobic. Consider this era, this book, and also all the ways that the narrative has told us that Nick is unreliable. His insistence that he's honest comes across as a defense mechanism. With that in mind, some scholars say that yes, Nick is gay, but Fitzgerald wrote the scene with Mr. McKee with the intent that it be further taken as subtext that Nick isn't trustworthy. I've taught The Great Gatsby to several different 9th grade classes over the years, and I've observed something interesting. When we discuss the possible interesting undertones, well, students tend to like Nick more. We tend to sympathize with him more because we have a modern understanding of queerness and the struggles that the LGBT community faces. And I think that gives us a richer experience than F. Scott Fitzgerald could have anticipated. We are yet again butting heads with this concept of death of the author. Next, I asked Professor Greenlight how Nick feels about both Jordan and Jay.
So, when Nick got Gatsby 2 Christmas gifts, including a pair of gloves specifically designed for Gatsby's freakishly poor hands, but then didn't get Jordan anything, what's up with that? Are we meant to assume that he just forgot about Jordan because he was taking too many hits of the old American Dream gun? Or does it say something about the nature of his bonds with both of these characters?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely says something about the nature of his bonds with these characters. I mean, clearly Nick thinks that he can have both, that he can have this dependable girlfriend who will just sort of be there for him regardless of whether he even remembers anything about her, and that he can also have this figure in his life that he cares about so damn much he wrote a book about him. It's obviously a tragedy for, what is his girlfriend's name? Emma Mae Jordan Dixon. I mean, do we even know what her face looks like? It's really tragic, isn't it? Right? Like, she's into Nick, Nick's into Gatsby, Gatsby's into Daisy, Daisy's into Daisy. That's a painful daisy chain. that's an uncomfortable experience for everybody. Everyone is getting the short end of the stick there, and I think that's why it's a tragedy.
Cypher is real, he's sinful and yellow. He's a triangle fella with mischief in mind. Cypher.
All right. I want you to think about all of the relationships in the story. Some of these are rooted in love, but some of them are more out of convenience. Which ones do you believe are real? Are they all real? Are they all exploitative? And as you go through, I want you to think about what F. Scott Fitzgerald would have thought of. How's that here? Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. Okay, we have another discussion, guys. We're not talking about the fucking PowerPoint, we're talking about the fucking book. So how about I do my fucking job and you do yours, and how about you watch your fucking language, Matt? This is your last warning. Now, take out your books. As we were saying, relationships. Are any of the relationships in this book real? Think about it. Tom can't afford to buy Myrtle a palace, but all she gets is a stay at his apartment with a picture of Versailles on the wall. Nick and Gatsby's bond is initiated out of utility. Gatsby became Nick's friend to get close to Daisy, and Nick, it seems, is just fine with that. Tom's bond with Myrtle, James' bond with Dan Cody, Nick's relationship to Gatsby. Almost everyone has a bond rooted in an imbalance of wealth. And Gatsby, our starry-eyed lover, even describes Daisy's voice as being, quote, full of money. What does this tell us about the way that Fitzgerald views relationships? If you asked me, I'd say that he's saying that love is a fucking racket. It doesn't matter what you do for them. It doesn't matter if you help them accomplish their stupid fucking dreams. He's never going to look twice at you, Nick. Yes, you facilitated his stupid affair with the most vapid and annoying person in the world. Yes, you gave him the blueprints and the secrets into interdimensional travel. Yes, you understand each other in a way that no one really ever will. But it doesn't matter, because love isn't real. It's all fucking chemicals. As Fitzgerald says at the end of chapter 6, love is a chemically induced hypnosis that the human body uses to trick people into not eating each other just long enough to procreate. Love is a trick, and worst of all, it's a trick you play on yourself. Even Fitzgerald believes that this is all fucking garbage. Love is a deal, and it's either one-sided, like a parasite feasting on your brain, giving you nothing in return, or it's at least symbiotic enough to get you to feel like you matter. So on that note, let's move on to the next discussion. Okay, 3 minutes on a clock, and I am gonna get some fucking water. I don't know what you're talking about, Matt. The only book I want you focusing on is The Great Gatsby. Now, finish the discussion, okay? Okay. Discussion is over. 1 second. I'm gonna make sure there's no more glitches in the PowerPoint. Okay, went through the PowerPoint. I think we're fine. I'm not really sure what happened there, and I am sorry that I lost my cool. It seems I'm getting hacked. I will discuss next steps with the school's IT department, but I am sincerely sorry. That being said, PowerPoint should be rid of any weird images, so let's do this. Okay, looks good. I'm positive, Tyler. Honest. I would just like us to continue as normal. We're at the last few slides. This is the last section. And we were having some great discussions, and I'd like to continue that. Okay? All right. So, chapter 7. This is when the stuff in this book gets interesting. Gatsby, Nick, Jordan, Tom, and Daisy head into the city, with Tom driving Gatsby's yellow car. He stops for gas at George's shop, where George Wilson notices the bright yellow car. Remember, this car is super noticeable. Wilson mentions to Tom that he recently wised up about Myrtle's cheating, though he does not know who with, and he plans to move out west with her. Meanwhile, Tom also suspects that Daisy is cheating on him. That means that Tom is on the ropes. He's about to lose his mistress and his wife, possibly in the same day. So I want to talk about this section because it's actually my favorite part of the book. Quote, I suppose the latest thing is to sit back and let Mr. Nobody from Nowhere make love to your wife. Well, if that's the idea, then you can count me out. Nowadays, people begin by sneering at family life and family institutions, and next they'll throw everything overboard and have intermarriage between black and white. And this leaves everyone dumbfounded, with Jordan replying, we're all white here. So in this example, Tom realizes he is being cheated on, and he decides to make it about the white race. It's his favorite dinner conversation topic. He's like an uncle who won't stop talking about the 5G towers at Thanksgiving. Absolutely single-minded. I don't know how to impart on all of you that this is actually like a good book. I know I need to say that. I'm an English teacher, and I know all the books you kids will read in high school are great American classics, but I'm telling you guys, The Great Gatsby is actually good. It's funny, it's dramatic, it's got bits. Olivia, I want you to do well in this class, but I also just hope you read this book because it's an enjoyable experience. And this section manages to be about something even deeper. To Tom, Gatsby stealing his wife isn't a personal, deep betrayal. It's symbolic to him in the way that the world is changing. He doesn't strongly emotionally care about Daisy, as evidenced by the fact that he can't stop cheating on her, but he cares about his pride and he cares about his status, and the fact that a lesser person in society could be the one taking Daisy from him. And Tom is being absurd. So absurd that Jordan is calling him on it. Stay on topic, Tom. We're all white here. So this culminates in a giant fight. Tom tells Gatsby, I know you're dating my wife, and Gatsby bites back with, yes, I've loved her for 5 years, and you know what else? She's leaving you for me, because she never loved you. Tell him, Daisy. Tell him you never loved him. And she can't do it. She tries, but she ultimately can't, because the truth is, she loved Tom. She loved them both. And that takes the wind right out of Gatsby's sails. At this point, Tom reveals the truth. Gatsby didn't make his money inheriting it or through legal means. He's a bootlegger, and Meyer Wolfsheim's mob. He's gotten people thrown in prison, and judging by his reaction, he has very likely killed people, or at least gotten people killed. The truth of this terrifies Daisy, and their affair is over. Great question in the chat. These characters have been getting drunk this entire time. Why does Gatsby being part of that industry cause so much fear in Daisy? And that's a very good question, Aaliyah, with a few possibilities, but if you were to ask me, I'd say it was a mix of Gatsby's expression in this moment, described here by Nick as being as though he had killed a man, but also Tom and Daisy likely imagined themselves as separate from that world. Like, yeah, we're drinking, but we're not the ones bootlegging. We're not criminals. It's awful that crime is happening, but it isn't our fault. I imagine it's a bit like seeing the sausage get made. But they're fueling that industry? That is true. Yes, they are ultimately hypocrites. So, this is the tragic climax of the story. Daisy and Gatsby take the yellow car, Tom and the others take Tom's blue car, and it is revealed that the yellow car struck and killed Myrtle Wilson in a hit and run. Both Tom and George Wilson are overwhelmed by grief at the death, and Tom suspects it was Gatsby who hit Myrtle. You know, Tyler, I think that's a fair question. It's up for interpretation, but if you ask me, Myrtle is characterized by her femininity and her sensuality. It's intrinsically tied to her vitality. I think the imagery is symbolic of that vitality being ripped away. It's also memorable, considering you remembered it enough to ask about it. Chapter 7 is also when we learn that George found the collar for a dog that Tom bought for Myrtle in Chapter 2, and that's how he discovered that she was cheating, and then he locked her up. This chapter represents a change in George's character. Before this, quote, he was his wife's man and not his own. But that's not the case after learning about her infidelity. So, afterwards, Tom, Jordan, and Nick drive home, and Nick is completely disgusted with Daisy, Tom, and Jordan's ability to just move past the horrible events of that evening. As he says, he's had enough of them for one day. Outside, he discovers Gatsby hiding out, and he learns that it wasn't actually Gatsby who was driving the car, but Daisy, and Gatsby intends to take the full blame. In Chapter 8, there are some threads left to tie up. First off, Gatsby is still defending Daisy to Nick, and still believes that she never really loved Tom as much as she thinks. Next, we learn that Wilson is convinced that whoever was driving that yellow car must have been the person that Myrtle was cheating on him with. Now, we know that Myrtle ran out because she saw Tom driving the car earlier, and that is why she ran out. So George isn't completely off base, but of course, Tom was not the one who hit her, and neither was Gatsby. So Wilson looks into the eyes of the billboard, insisting that the eyes of God see all, as though he really believes that the eyes on the billboard are the eyes of God. And by the end of the chapter, the great Gatsby has been shot dead in his swimming pool. These are Nick's last words to Jay. "They're a rotten crowd," I shouted across the lawn. "You're worth the whole damn bunch put together." I've always been glad I said that. It was the only compliment I ever gave him, because I disapproved of him from beginning to end. First he nodded politely, and then his face broke into that radiant and understanding smile, as if we'd been in ecstatic cahoots on that fact all the time. Alright guys, we're on the last chapter. We made it! We're at the finish line of this lecture. It's going to be okay. So, Nick finds himself in charge of Gatsby's funeral, and he feels he owes it to Gatsby to make sure that people actually attend the burial, but no one is coming. The only one who actually shows up in town for the funeral is Henry Gatz, Gatsby's father, who to this day is still so proud of his son. His son, who, by the way, if you remember, was telling everyone at the start of the book that his parents are dead. So only Nick, Henry, and Owl Eyes are at the funeral. And Owl Eyes remarks that people used to come by the hundreds to the parties. And now, no one is here. Months later, a couple things happen. Jordan calls Nick out and calls him, quote, another bad driver, referencing the conversation that they had in Chapter 3 about how it takes 2 bad drivers to have an accident. Next, Nick meets Tom, and he learns that Tom was the one who told Wilson that the car was Gatsby's, and he did so knowing that Wilson would try to kill him. Before moving back to the Midwest, Nick walks down Gatsby's beach, reflecting on how Gatsby must have felt when looking at that green light. He compares it to the American dream of people coming to the United States, a dream that Nick no longer believes in. And that is the Great Gatsby. Ethan, language. So, let's hear again from Professor Greenlight.
When Jay confronts Daisy at the hotel, towards the emotional climax of The Great Bill, we learn that despite his unending trust and devotion for her, lasting over 6 years, toiling away to create a portal into wealth and prosperity, she still seems to have not loved him at the same depth. In fact, she treats him less like an equal companion and more like a pet. Or perhaps her affections were merely a means to escape her crumbling dimension of a marriage so that she can party forever. Do you think that Daisy's affections for Jay were real? After all, when he eventually leaves her life, she leaves town with Tom, and she basically immediately drowns her sorrows at O'Sadley's interdimensional pub, goes on a drunken bender, and repeatedly begs the lady at the drive-thru for 1 Gatsby, please.
I'm not sure Daisy has a great sense of what's real. I think she's kind of at this altitude where the air is so thin. She's on such a pedestal. She's so distant from, like, you know, like the sort of the normal human world that she sort of flits in and out of sort of whims and fancies, and will become incredibly sad and lost and confused, and then retreat to what she knows. So, you know, what would you call that? What is that feeling? What is that feeling when, you know, you want to be adored, and then when you're adored, you know, then you ruin it.
Mhm.
I think Daisy's sort of lost, and you know, lost people can create chaos for the people around them. I think it would be very hard to be in love with the Daisy. I think it would. I think it could break a person, but I think it would be very hard to be a Daisy because you're always fundamentally alone in some way.
Oh. All right. So just a couple bits left to review. First up, the fact that Nick does not tell Tom that it was Daisy who killed Myrtle, noting that, quote, they were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back to their money or their vast carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together and let other people clean up the mess they had made. Why do you think Nick didn't tell Tom? Any guesses? Come on, guys, 3 responses. He didn't think it would make a difference. Gatsby was already dead. Not worth the drama. Daisy is his cousin. So all of these touch on it, but really, I think there's an answer that y'all are missing. I want you to consider, what would Gatsby have wanted? I propose that perhaps Nick was remembering Gatsby's wishes. Gatsby loved Daisy more than anything, so perhaps keeping Daisy's crime a secret was Nick's way of honoring that. All right, next. Here are some examples of foreshadowing that, hint hint, might be in the exam, so try to remember these in particular. Probably the biggest bit of foreshadowing. In Chapter 3, Jordan and Nick discuss careless drivers and how carelessness leads to people being hurt after witnessing the car accident outside the manor. This foreshadows the accident that kills Myrtle, emphasized by the description of Tom and Daisy as careless people. Okay, we got through the lecture. It is time for the last discussion. All right. Switch to webcam. So, before the discussion, I want you all to take out your books because there's something about the way that Gatsby discusses Daisy that is worth mentioning. Even after Daisy kills a woman, even after Daisy is unable to proclaim to Gatsby that she never loved Tom, that she only ever loved him, he still loves her. And he insists that she's just mistaken. He insists that she was just very excited this afternoon. The way Tom described me scared her, even though she said that to Gatsby before Tom revealed the bootlegging to her. So Gatsby is simultaneously ignoring Daisy's agency and feelings and still putting her up on this impossible pedestal. If you'll turn your pages to... What? I'm gonna grab another copy. I know I have one around here somewhere. Fuck. The fuck? Here's one. So, if you turn to page... You know what? Forget the excerpt. I remember what it says. Basically... What the book says... Sorry, guys, sorry guys. You know what? How about we just do the discussion? You've had enough of me yapping, right? Let's do the assignment. Let's get this fucking over with. There we go. So, the last discussion of the day, and then it's all fucking over. It's all over. And we're gonna be okay. It's fine. So, you know what? I have no idea why I'm even sharing my screen. You know where the discussions are. You can get there yourselves. The question is, why is Jay Gatsby a sympathetic character? You have 3 minutes. I can't set my alarm. I'll just keep an eye on it, okay? It's fine. It's fine. Whew. I'm sorry, what do you mean you don't know how to answer it? What do you mean he ruined his own life? I mean, he isn't perfect. He didn't care too much for Daisy's agency. Well, it wasn't just about the money. He wanted Daisy's affections. That's a fair take, but it isn't like... Madison, I don't think you understand, but just pretend you do. Do the discussion assignment, okay? It's easy. No, Madison, I'm not saying that. Money doesn't buy happy. I think you don't know what you're fucking talking about. How about that? You can sit there and you can judge and you can think money doesn't buy happiness, but you don't know anything. Not yet. You're what, 14? You live in a nice house in a nice neighborhood. Life hasn't come for you yet, Madison, and one day it will. But until then, you get to sit in a classroom while I beam in from home to listen to you miss the fucking point. You might still have the luxury of thinking money doesn't buy you happiness as you scroll on TikTok on the phone your mom bought for you, with service you don't need to pay for once a month, or internet that you probably think materializes out of thin fucking air. But what do you know? You're in school for a reason. Your brains aren't cooked yet. You're walking around with that half-formed gray matter jostling around in there, doing nothing with it, but deluding yourself by thinking that you know more than me. Guess what, Madison? Money might not buy happiness, but it buys food. It buys medicine. It pays hospital bills, and it pays for internet so I could read this stupid bullshit in a stupid chat. And you know what else? It pays for 23 fucking copies of The Great Gatsby for ungrateful shits like you to not even read, Olivia, because the school's old copies were falling apart and they didn't want to dish out the cash for a new one. So you want to ask why Jay Gatsby would give up his values for money? Why he'd break the law or make a deal or get someone killed for money? Because no one was fucking meant to live like this. Jay was promised the same garbage we were all promised. That if you work hard, you'll be rewarded. But none of you are going to get anything. That's the point. That's what you're not understanding. That when you get older and the bills keep coming and someone shows up in the woods and extends their hand and promises you an answer or at least a temporary ladder out of the hole, you'll take it. And maybe someone gets hurt along the way. But sometimes it's either them or you. Because otherwise, you'll get evicted in the dead of winter, or you can't afford the next round of chemo, or you end up with your brains leaking into a pool. But let me tell you something about Gatsby. He at least had the pool. Fuck. Fuck. Miss Ruby. Sorry, I was, apologies. I'm really sorry, everyone. No, Ruby, please. It's usually fine. I've been under a lot of pressure. This has been a weird class. There's something wrong with my lecture, and please. You don't need to bring in Dal. It's gonna be fun. What book? We're talking about the book. We're talking about The Great Gatsby. Ruby, we're not talking about that. I just need to find another copy. One that's normal. 1 second. Sit tight. I know I have one around here, okay? One that's normal. You know what? I could pull up a PDF, you know? It's fine. So, students, take out your books. There, I found one. Okay, it's good. Students, I want you to turn to page... Oh my god. You know what? Fuck it. I don't even care. We'll use this one, alright, everyone? Take out your books and... No! Leave me alone! Bill? I know you can see this, and I don't care. I'm not showing them the book. I needed help, but I didn't ask you to do what you did. And right now, we're not talking about the book I found in the woods. We're not talking about the deal. We're not talking about the fucking Book of Bill. We're talking about Jay Gatsby and Nick Carraway and the mistakes that they made. And these students are going to learn. Now, I would like all of you, please, to turn to the last page in the book.
At the end of the book, when Gatsby gets shot and dies and goes to the theraprism, is the reader meant to believe that Gatsby will eventually find the peace that he needs to move on from Stanford Pines? Maybe find better friends than his henchmaniacs and stop living in the past? Or do you think that F. Scott Fitzgerald meant for the reader to realize that that's the real tragedy? That Gatsby will never learn, will never grow, and will never move on, as though he were a stone statue.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, when I read The Great Gatsby in high school, read it as a cautionary tale. You know, that wouldn't it be cool to be like Gatsby? Wouldn't it be cool to have the silver tongue that allows you to talk your way into anything you've ever wanted, to like rise to incredible heights? Like, you know, wouldn't it be neat if you could lie and cheat and break every rule that you ever imagined and you know, charisma your way into anything you desire, with sort of no regard for reality, and with a recklessness that speaks to sort of monomaniacal ego. You know, it's exciting we see characters like Ahab or Gatsby or Bill Cipher, and we're like, yeah, I want to live like that. I want to just eat candy all night and light things on fire and just do whatever the hell I want. But you know, there's a cost to this. I mean, I think from a narrative point of view, you know, there are tragic characters. There's characters who undergo an arc, And those characters are sort of redemptive, and they're meant to sort of make us feel hopeful, like we can change and grow. And then there are characters who are meant to be, the dark shadow of our own ambitions, don't become like that. I do not have a lot of hope for Gatsby. He seems like a particularly broken character, but I think that's the point is, oh, isn't it weird that I can feel sympathy for a broken fuck up who doesn't seem capable of change? What is that? I got to interrogate that in myself as a reader. Like, that tension is actually what's interesting, is that, it's Schrodinger's cat. It's redeemable and irredeemable. It's unsympathetic and it's sympathetic. It's both. And it flickers back and forth between in your head. And that creates an interesting buzz, which creates discourse. So then some people say, oh, Gatsby is redeemable. Actually, he's a good guy. And other people say, no, he's not. And it's like, yes, that's how you're supposed to feel. That's more interesting, I think.
Hello, class. I want to talk about the Book of Bill. The Book of Bill is a wonderful and very enjoyable book. It even has the Great Gatsby in it. So don't think of this as a different topic, but an extension of the wonderful conversation we were already having. I don't know what you're talking about, Tyler. I feel wonderful. We could all feel wonderful if we keep an open mind. I gotta be honest. When I first found this book, I was a little scared, but then it showed me the most incredible things. It called me, I heard it in the wind. And then I found this, buried in the leaves. My dream wedding dress, the floor plan of my dream home, insane predictions, a written account of every Christmas present I ever got as a kid. Look at these. I haven't seen these childhood photos in years. I thought I lost them in a fire when I was 6 years old. Wasn't I cute back then? Regardless, the interesting thing about this book isn't just the cool things it can show us, but it's also that no one knows where the wisdom in its pages comes from. It's a mystery to us all. You might come across it in the woods, in the tub, in the trash. Try getting rid of it. Try burning it. Go ahead. Try. It'll come back. Every single time. But one of the most interesting things I found in the Book of Bill were the stories of the men that Bill visited before me. Let's learn about them together, shall we? First, let's talk about Thurbert Wagstaff. Thurbert was an advertiser working in the year 1901. The poor man was on the verge of losing everything. His home, his job, all because his stupid fleshbag brain was no good at thinking of a smart slogan all on his own. Poor little dum-dum. But then something wonderful happened. Cypher answered his prayers. He came up with a slogan so brilliant that Thurbert's boss gave him his own wife. Remember, kids, Cypher provides. Up next, Stanford Pines. Stanford Pines grew up in the seaside town of Glasshyard Beach, New Jersey with his twin brother, who isn't important and who you shouldn't care about. All you should really retain about Stanley is that he's worthless, and that his father didn't even want to see his stupid, ugly face again without being bribed with a bag of cash. Stanford, on the other hand, was viciously bullied because he was a disgusting freak with 6 fingers. Isn't that sad? But no worries, he went on to become a researching scientist in the town of Gravity Falls. When his funding was at risk of being cut, he was visited by Bill Cypher, who fixed all of Ford's problems and gave him the blueprints he needed to create a beautiful, wonderful machine that would have heralded humanity into a new era. What a gem! And handsome, too. I hear all of his sides are of equal length, but don't tell Principal Dale I said that. Next, let's talk about what this means. We've learned a lot about the American dream from The Great Gatsby, but I think these stories from the scripture of the Book of Bill can glean even more insight. The book provides us with tales of men who were so desperate that they were willing to do anything to accomplish their dreams. Question for the class: what do Thurbert, Gatsby and Stanford have in common? That's right, they're worthless, the same way you're all worthless, the same way that everyone is worthless, unless they can prove their ability to generate worth for someone else. Think again about Stanford Pines, his passion for cryptids, for the paranormal, for the research that's intrinsically tied to his abnormal identity. All of it with no value whatsoever to anyone but him. That guy had his bootstraps pulled up high enough to hang himself with, but it isn't effort that generates profit, and it isn't passion. There is no money in your dinky little journeys to self-actualization. His benefactors were about to pull the plug on his research. Platypuses and Mothmen? Useless to them. But interdimensional travel? Just think of the economic implications. That's where the money is. In a society where you're often valued by what you produce and what you generate for those above you, we find that the line between Ford's motivations and the motivations of his stupid, ugly, dumb brother Stan get blurrier and blurrier. Both brothers at the end of the day are begging for validation, and for both of them, funds are the avenue to get there. The same way that Jay Gatsby probably can't be loved and accepted by anyone, including Daisy, without making money. The way none of us can live without making money. Or being born with it, but we can't all be Madison. You might push back, saying that if Gatsby didn't spend his life chasing that money and chasing Daisy, maybe he could have lived a long, happy life. And sure, maybe everything is an Icarus metaphor, and maybe he should have been happy working in the fields of North Dakota, pretending not to be traumatized by the war, finding a job in a factory he'd inevitably lose a limb in, marrying some girl who wasn't Daisy, and who he'd secretly resent for the rest of his life. And maybe that should have been enough for him. Maybe then he wouldn't have died face down in a pool at 30, unloved and alone. George's bullet wouldn't have gotten him, sure, but the factory conditions would have. Having no heat in Oregon winter would have. Not paying to have a lump on a joint looked at before it was too late would have. But money isn't easy to come by, at least not in a normal way. Gatsby could have toiled away in a field in North Dakota for the rest of his natural lifespan and still wouldn't have made enough for that shirt that made Daisy cry. At least by making the deals he did and bending the rules he bent, he got to hold her. At least he had something to lose. You see, the American dream is the belief that if you do everything right and take every opportunity offered to you, you can make it in this incredible country. But that means that if someone offers you a deal, you should take it, right? And when you do take it and they fix everything, you should be grateful, right? Let's hear from Professor Greenlight. What does he have to say about obsessions?
What do you believe is Ford's green light? What is Stan's and what is Bill's?
Stan's green light is his family's love. Ford's green light at the beginning of the series is an image of himself as this like untouchable, historical, singular great man. And Bill's green light honestly, it mostly seems to be like a feeling of complete like power and freedom in at any given moment. Billy's running from all this stuff. Bill has burned everything and the fire is in the distance approaching and he has to stay one step ahead of it at every given moment. If you could imagine, say, being a murderer and then having to constantly be one step ahead of the law. And then the only moment when you find peace is when you're drunk at a party pretending to be somebody else. And at that moment, you're not a murderer anymore, as far as they know. But you're always kind of having to move. You're not really, you're very reactive. You know, even though Bill has a plan thousands of years in the making, for Bill, that's a very short span of time. So, I think, yeah, Stan wants Ford's love. Ford sort of wants the universe's love. And Bill is just fucking one step away from his demons. And he's never going to escape them. That's just not how it works.
This video is my submission to the Teachers Deserve More USA sweepstakes for $10,000. My name is Hannah Osfar. I'm 38 years old. I live in the small town of Naberius Creek, California, and I've been an English school teacher for 7 years. I'm sending in this video because I need help. Recently, I was diagnosed with an aggressive form. Oh boy, discussion time! I know we've done a lot of yapping today, but what's a little more? I just want you all to know from the bottom of my heart that none of you will use any of this knowledge on The Great Gatsby in your day-to-day life. You might think you're sitting here in this class reading a 100-year-old book because the goal is to learn, but it isn't. Not really. You're here because reading comprehension is a profitable skill that someone will give you money to demonstrate. And you're all being graded and competitively ranked, and at the end of this horse race you call high school, one of you will be valedictorian, and at least 2 of you will be loser dropouts. And then people with deep pockets will take a gander and decide how likely you are to make them money, and bet on you accordingly by giving you a job that makes you miserable and kills you slowly for the rest of your days. And maybe you think you're worth more than a GPA and which college you get into and which of the 5 mega corporations we have left at this point decide to pelt you with pennies while you dance. Kids, hang up, get out of here, don't listen to him, he's trying to trick you, he always lies. But you know who won't believe that your life has intrinsic value? The water company, the gas company, the grocery store, the pharmacy. They'll all take a look at your bank accounts and see that you didn't dance well enough for those pennies and decide, well, I guess they don't deserve running water or food or insulin. And then you'll die. And the funeral home will have to check and see if your family danced for their pennies to see if they deserve to bury you in anything nicer than a cardboard box left in an open field. Isn't that right, Hannah? And that, I think, is something worth mentioning, and something we can take away from these wonderful stories in the Book of Bill. But guess what, kids? There is a cheat code to the American dream, and it can be found in the book. He tells you everything. He tells you how to make money, he tells you how to get into heaven, but above all, he tells you how he can best help you in your pathetic lives. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We still have a discussion assignment. 3 minutes on the clock. I'm feeling fun, so I'll even play a video while you guys answer. Remember, your attendance score depends on this, and thus your grades, and thus your GPA, and thus the rest of your lives. Wouldn't it be nice if there was someone who could help alleviate some of that pressure? Oh well, time to do what you gotta do. Dance, students. Dance. So, this Daisy broad, she's not so bad. All she wanted was to have a little fun, so she wanted to destroy the universe. God forbid women have hobbies, am I right? And look, I know Gatsby's a little butthurt that she still wanted to keep Tom around as a side piece, but it's the roaring 20s, Gatsby. There's enough Daisy to go around. What's a little inspiring other scientists here and there in the age of jazz and liquor? Anyways, at the end of the story, right before Gatsby gets his brains blown out, admit it, he still wanted her, right? And if it wasn't for his stupid family getting in the way, he would have come crawling back, right? Right?
Those are fair points. I agree with the perspective that a Great Depression is coming up. We might as well enjoy the present while it lasts. I think, boy, it's a tricky thing being a character who's good at deceiving other people, because it means you're probably also good at deceiving yourself. You might even lose track of what's true. A compelling narrative is compelling. But this is one of the tragedies of intelligent characters. Is the more intelligent they are, the better rationalizations they can create, and a hair trigger for any choice at any given moment. But it's a great rationalization.
Hi, kids. Great to be here. I'm the answer to all your problems. Nice to finally meet eye to eye. Ethan, come on. I know you were dropped on your head as a baby, 4 times to be exact, but don't be stupid. There's nothing wrong with Teach, aside from the job where they gotta talk to pint-sized idiots all day. And the cancer, of course. They're doing great. Never better. You know, I don't think we need chat on anymore. All you're doing with it is asking stupid questions. There. That'll make it easier to edit. Now, it's time for you kids to listen and learn. But it's nice to meet you all. My name's Bill Cipher. That's right, my theraprism suite is empty and all the devils are here. I'm here to make your awful lives just a little bit less awful. Want to know how? Well, here are my credentials. Among my many accomplishments, I was Stephen King's cocaine dealer while he wrote the second half of it. I had a recent stint controlling the dead worm in RFK's brain, and I'm the number 3 hide-and-seek champion in the world, second only to Bigfoot and Jimmy Hoffa. I'd say that qualifies me for a few minutes as a substitute English teacher. Overqualified, really. Still don't believe me? Here's a look at your future. You might not believe me yet, but don't worry, you will. Especially when you see what's coming. Congratulations in advance, Lewis. And James, I'd invest in a carbon monoxide detector if I were you. Now, where was I? Oh yes, my sales pitch. First thing you gotta know about me is that, like me or not, I get results. And because all of you still don't have your frontal lobes fully baked, I'll make it easy. There is a book in the woods. It's a great book. A fun book. A New York Times bestseller even. I'll tell you how to find it, and all you gotta do is read it. And then after that, I don't know, pass it around like a hot potato or a hot poker or whatever hot thing poor kids play with these days. Looking at you, Tyler. Just stand around, read it, and you'll get anything you want for a small favor. And no, reading the book isn't the favor. Reading the book is a privilege. Like I said, a New York Times bestseller. You can't miss that. Now, normally, I like to work with you all one-on-one, get to know what you really want in life on a personal level, but class sizes these days are just getting bigger and bigger, so I figured I should go with my typical go-to. There are lots of things that motivate the average person, but I find that nothing's a better broad motivator than the ability to survive in this world. And seeing as a dozen eggs are, what, $9 or something, let's do a quick economics lesson. Now, typically, there are really only 3 or so real methods for paying the bills. You can do what most people do, which is slave away for a megacorporation that wouldn't think twice about forcing you to work through a medical crisis while you die inside. You can find another morally dubious way to make money on the side with mixed results. Or you can do the easy thing, which is let me take a crack at it. But hey, don't let me decide for you. Your minds, experiences, and bodies are yours to do with as you please. Maybe you don't want to do the easy thing. Maybe you hate pain-free, risk-free experiences. You're the master of your own destiny. Hey, that's nifty. Now that we've established that living sustainably with financial stability in this fuck-ass country is impossible, I'm sure you all have some questions. Let's go into the FAQ section. You might be wondering, after all these tales of obsession and ambition, where's the line between the two? And honestly, who cares? So what if Gatsby was obsessed with getting the money to win back Daisy? It wasn't the money who killed him in the end. After all, what is the American dream if not going after what you want in life? Don't you want your house, your car, your spouse, and your 2.5 ugly kids? The kids are easy enough. The average person can't kick a rock without hitting someone sad and desperate enough to mash their wet bits together. But what about the car and the house? What about your medical bills? What about the respect of the upper echelons of the scientific community? Now that takes a go-getter attitude. Obsession. Pfft. Oh no, he was obsessed with being happy and having no problems and living a fulfilled life. He wasn't obsessed, he was goal-oriented. And that's the American dream, baby.
Question: what if I end up doing something evil when I let you possess me? Have you considered that this is a stupid worry and that you're stupid for having it? I'll be honest, I haven't set in stone what I'll do once I have the deal secured and you hand over your adolescent lanky forms. I'm in a very fluid stage of planning, going back to my core values, synergizing and manifesting, and putting on whatever flesh sparks joy and discarding the rest. Turns out, patiently putting plans in motion over millennia doesn't yield the results that I was hoping for, so I'm giving a fuck around and find out approach a shot. But that shouldn't make a difference. You'll still get what you signed up for. I'm not paying you in yen. Blood money spends the same. Seriously, I don't know what Hana was whining about. Come on, Hana. He was a landlord. A millionaire even. He sucked. I mean, his kids and grandkids probably didn't agree, but that's only because he was incredibly loving and kind to them all the time. But you're always saying there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, and this guy was consuming like a black hole, and he was charging you to do it. Listen to yourself. Oh, boo-hoo, I asked Phil for help and he gave me exactly what I asked for. Yeesh, give me a break. Get off the cross, we need the wood. What else am I gonna bash myself in the face with, huh? Both Hana and the rest of you all gotta learn. Nothing in this world is free. Sometimes, killing Sergeant Howie is the only way to get your apples back. And if that scares you, just remember, you guys make deals every day. When you use a smartphone, you make a deal. You're agreeing to look the other way, and in exchange, the company puts some other shitty kid in the factory so you don't gotta be there. When you pay for hot cocoa, you get to enjoy the sugar rush without thinking about who picks the beans. You go to the park, and you don't gotta think about whose bones are fertilizing the flower beds. You make a deal with those 5 megacorporations the same way a tapeworm makes a deal with a host. At the end of the day, life is nothing more than the deals you make and the deals you don't take. And for every good thing you have, someone else got the short stick in the exchange. And what about this school that they have you hold up in? What's your end of the deal, where you stare at a laptop for an hour pretending to care about these rich idiots from the 1920s? I mean, I guess Olivia gets to go somewhere where she doesn't have to hear her parents scream about their inevitable divorce. By the way, Liv, that voice in the back of your head, it's right. It is all your fault. So she gets something out of this, but what about the rest of you saps? You come to school every day, and you listen to some stupid teacher give you life advice, but they're only able to pay their late rent because they asked me to come in and fill up their bank account. This is the asshole you guys gotta listen to while they tell you about the American dream? It sounds to me like you're the ones getting the short stick here. Ultimately, the American education system has nothing for you, and it's losing funding, so really you're getting even less than before. And I know I sound critical, so let me make something crystal clear. I don't want things to change at all. I love the system. Me and the system go together like searing pain and a Lego block. I'm not here to discredit the American dream. I'm here to facilitate it. I'm the grease on the rusty, desperate wheels of capitalism, and shaking my hand's the best way to get that grease on your palm. And I mean, even if I did hate the system, it's not like it's changing anytime soon. Everyone always talks about a revolution, but who's got the time? I certainly don't. Hana absolutely doesn't. They've got 3 jobs. Revolutions take work, making phone calls, connecting with one another, organizing in the streets, raising funds for your own community infrastructure, and defending the vulnerable by all means possible before they get picked off by the bullets of the state. And who needs all that? It sounds like a lot of something for nothing, if you ask me. Not to mention, if there is a revolution, you'll never get the blood out of your school uniforms. Not with those cheap polyester blends. So, instead of societal upheaval, why don't you just take a look at this book, shake my hand, and let me take care of everything? This way, you don't even need to talk on the phone. But if you're still worried about what could go wrong when you chase after the things you want, let's bring this back to good old Gatsby. Yeah, maybe he wouldn't have died if he just counted his blessings. Maybe he wouldn't have died if he stopped chasing that bag and if the girl of his dreams didn't kill Myrtle in his big expensive car. But you know, he also wouldn't have died if they just doubled back to hit George too.
If you want the taste of butter, you got to sign the book. It's quid pro quo. And your sense of morality is a small price to pay for survival. It's what a lot of people have paid without me even getting to them. Hell, it's what Gatsby paid. And things might have gotten a bit dicey at the end there. But before that, you gotta admit, he was living pretty deliciously. In the end, Gatsby isn't real. But you know who was real? F. Scott Fitzgerald. And he died penniless and miserable. And probably thinking about the girl who Zelda could never be. I wonder what he would have done if he had the chance I'm offering you all today. So, think it over. Come and find me. Oh, speaking of offers, there's someone else I gotta ask. See you later, kids. And don't forget to take the quiz. It's due Wednesday. And remember, the American dream is only one deal away.
Okay, Hirsch, let me level with you here. You and I both know you never pictured you spending your Sunday afternoon like this. I mean, showing up in some weird fan's pretentious video essay? Yeesh, we get it. Overambition and the pursuit of wealth and power is the downfall of man, yada yada yada. Spoken like a real broke bitch. They didn't need to pull out the whiteboard and the costuming for that one. Frankly, this could have been a YouTube short. And I know why Hana's doing this. They want people to think they're clever. But why are you here, man? You used to fill up Comic-Con panels. Clearly, your life isn't going the way you wanted it to. But you know, I can fix that. What do you want? A clone to do all these stupid interviews for you? Your anonymity online? Fair wages for animation workers? Whatever it is, I can make it happen. So what do you say, Hirsch? Want to make a deal?
You know, that's a great proposition, but I already made a deal a long time ago with a different demon. It was a mouse wearing pants. I shook its hand, and it did give me everything I wanted. So I don't think I can two-time that other demon with you, but I appreciate the offer.
You draw the line at infidelity with demons?
I do, yes. No, I'm a faithful faithful Faust.
So, like, did Gatsby fuck the triangle?
I don't know how you could fuck a triangle, but I encourage anyone to try to answer that question on their own time.